to us about the watershed and how to build the rain garden. So we're happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. So my workshop tonight is how to build a rain garden. But first, I might go into a little bit of background. First, let's see if my mouse works. So I'll talk first about what is stormwater runoff and why is it a problem. So stormwater runoff is rainfall that flows over impervious surfaces and enters our storm drains, our streams, and our rivers. Now, the problem is with stormwater runoff is that on those impervious surfaces, which are usually man-made, there can be all types of pollutants, including bacteria, petrochemicals, nitrogen, and things that come out of our exhaust. So there can be all kinds, when we're talking about parking lots, there can be bacteria coming from rooftops. So all of those impervious surfaces generate pollution that is washed away by surface water runoff. So when we talk about stormwater runoff, we also like to talk about stormwater management. So when we talk about stormwater management, it's actually an effort to reduce the volume of stormwater that is entering our storm sewer and improve the quality of the water that attains our storm sewers or our streams and our rivers. So there are things that every homeowner, business owners, or municipality can do to manage stormwater runoff in their community. So different examples can be as simple as installing a rain barrel on your rooftops downspout, so that'll capture the water that's originating from that particular impervious surface. And it helps to conserve water. So a rain barrel is a very effective tool that does both. Planting more trees, that's something that's very easy to do, is plant more trees, plus you're helping to support biodiversity, so again, that's another technique that is a win-win. Adding more flower beds and shrubs. Who doesn't like more flower beds and shrubs? So adding more flower beds and shrubs are just going to add more vegetation that can help absorb all of that surface water. Building a rain garden. So that's the topic of this workshop tonight. So we'll go a little bit more into detail on what exactly a rain garden is and how to build one. Creating any kind of infiltration system. So there can be some more like sand filters or systems underground that are more catch basins. So those can be more on the business side or commercial side of things. So next to a parking lot, there can be an infiltration system so that the runoff from a parking lot goes underground instead of into a storm sewer. So it can be building a wet pond or a dry pond, and that's also more on the commercial or municipal level. And it's restoring and building artificial wetlands or restoring natural wetlands will absolutely help to absorb and filter all of our surface water runoff and other surface waters too, and protect water quality. So all of these different techniques is all considered different types of stormwater management. So what is exactly a rain garden? So, a rain garden is basically a shallow depression that is planted with native perennial plants that love water. So, usually we will choose plants that have deep tap roots, so very long roots that creates pores into the ground, and water-loving plants so that they help to absorb a lot of that water. So, a rain garden is actually going to do several things. So, it's going to create a basin where water that either originates from a rooftop, an impervious surface, or a land area in general. So instead of being a raised bed, which is usual landscaping, it's a depression. So it creates a bowl shape. And in there, you plant your native plants and flowers. So they're actually going to grow their long roots with time, create those entrances into the ground, so create pores. So that'll help to infiltrate the water down into the ground, into the underground aquifers, so that actually helps recharge underground water tables, which is great for sustainability, for protecting our water, our drinking water, and our wells. And it can also help reduce the risks of flooding. So I'm not saying that one rain garden is going to help stop flooding, but several rain gardens or a network of rain gardens in a community can significantly reduce the impact of a heavy rainfall event that might generate a flash flood or localized flooding. So, we are providing a guide today, and we can make the digital version of this guide available to anyone who's watching this video that will provide you with a list of 30 plant species that are native to New Brunswick, or there's few that are not native to New Brunswick, but it's still important for a rain garden. But there is a list of 30 plants that are suitable for a rain garden that will help you choose when you're visiting your local nursery. So there's a little bit of planning that goes into designing your rain garden. So you have some site planning. So before you get started, you should be looking around your property after a heavy rainfall or during a rainfall. Put on your raincoat and go out and see where the water runs off your impervious surfaces. Where does the water land? Where would be kind of a logical place where you could capture that rainwater? So you should be choosing either a lower lying area where water puddles, you would like to build one maybe a little bit higher than where water puddles. So where water puddles is usually an indication of poor water infiltration into the ground. So consider building a rain garden to intercept the water before it pools into that spot that is always wet in your yard. So say if you're looking to capture the rainwater runoff from a driveway, you might consider within the pathway before it ends up in the lowest parts of your yard. We do advise to leave at least a 10 feet buffer between the foundation of your home and the limit of your rain garden, because we do not want infiltration of the water to go down your foundation and into your basement. So we do recommend at least 10 feet or 3 meters. A rain garden should not be installed within at least 15 feet from a septic tank or a leach field or a drinking water well. It's very important to call before you dig. So you make sure that there are no underground services before you put a shovel into the ground, whether it's power lines or any kind of other piping that you may have around your home. Be sure there are no underground services. Don't choose an area where it already pools. Sorry about that. Avoid locations too close to trees because we don't want to damage the roots. Actively building your rain garden with your shovel, and also a tree might not be used to the added saturation of water that might occur in the ground after you've built your rain garden. So not too close to trees, just to protect your trees. A rain garden can be planted on a slope, and if you do calculate your slope, the slope shouldn't be greater than 12%. So that's just that a 12% slope might be too steep, where an oversaturation in the soil might cause somewhat of a destabilization or somewhat of a landslide. So avoid a slope that is greater than 12%. Also, when you're choosing the location where you want to put your rain garden, you should perform an infiltration test to see what type of soil you have, whether it is a sandy soil or a clay type soil, which you are looking for a sandier soil, something that has a good infiltration rate. Now, I'm not saying that if you have a clay type soil that you can't build a rain garden, but if you have a section in your on your property where it's sandier than others, I would choose that spot over a spot that has a clay type soil, just because you're going to get a better infiltration. However, if you do have a clay type soil, there are amendments to the soil that you can do and modifications to the size and depth to your rain garden to prevent any water from remaining stagnant at the surface, because that's not what we want. We want a good rain garden where the water is not going to stand at the surface for more than 24 hours. So the guide also gives you the steps for a very simple infiltration test. So the infiltration test is quite simple. You dig a hole about 12 inches deep. You fill it with water once, you let it drain, and then you need to fill it again a second time and see how long it takes for that second refill to drain completely away. Now, you are looking for the water to be gone in the next 24 hours. So if it's longer than 24 hours, then that indicates that you have clay type soil and you should consider another location or consider making some amendments to your soil, such as adding sand when you start digging. So sizing a rain garden is one of the most frequent questions that I get is how big do I need to make my rain garden? And there's so many different formulas out there, some that are very simple and some that are very, very complicated, and it doesn't need to be very complicated at all. I've used a bit of a hybrid of different formulas that I've found throughout my research and my trainings and courses that I've taken on the subject. So basically you would like to look at the amount of impervious surfaces that you have. So let's say your rooftop, for example. If you just want to focus on your rooftop, remember that only half of the water from your rooftop is going to drain on one side and the other half is going to drain on the other side. So only remember to measure half of the surface area of your rooftop, which is the length versus the width. An easy way to do that, unless you have a measuring tape, which is perfectly fine, you can also use a simple tool like Google Earth and zoom in on your house and measure how big your rooftop is or how large your driveway is. And then once you know also from your infiltration test, if you have a soil type that is sandy or clay, all you need to do is take the drainage area that you've measured, that you want to capture, and you multiply that by 20% or 0.20 and then times 100 will give you your rain garden size in square meters. If you have a clay type soil, you should multiply that by 30%. So 30% of your drainage area for a clay type soil or 20% of your drainage area for a sandy type soil. Now, other things that you need to consider when you're building your rain garden is how much space do you actually have? You might not have as much as you've calculated. So a minimum of a garden size, if you really don't have much, I mean, any rain garden is better than no rain garden at all. So you can go as little as 5% of the drainage area that you're looking to capture. And that's perfectly fine. So also depends on your budget too. If you're building a very, very big rain garden, you need to consider how many plants that you might need to purchase to fill your garden. But you can also consider finding some wild plants to add to your rain garden, and that can help with your budget. So calculating the slope, there is a very simple method that you will find in the guide. It is very handy. So all you need is 2 stakes, a string, a level, and a measuring tape. So you can place a stake at each end at least 15 meters apart, but you would place a stake uphill and downhill of the area where you want to build your rain garden. You would tie a string at the base of the uphill stake and at the level height of your downhill stake. So you use your level to make sure the string is tight and level, straight. Then you measure your string, you measure the length, exact length that you did roll out. It doesn't have to be exactly 15 meters, so whatever length you did roll out, divided by the height. Sorry, the height divided by the width. So you measure the height, you measure the length, and then you just follow this simple formula times 100 and you get the slope. So height divided by the width, 1 times 100 equals the percent of your slope. So I do have an example here because we did put the guide to the test. So we built a rain garden with a homeowner. We drew the outline of it and then we placed the stakes and it worked perfectly well. So we measured the slope and that will help us calculate the depth and also the height of the berm, and you will see this in the following pictures. So once you have the string in place, you leave the string in place because it will serve you another purpose as you're digging and as you're building your rain garden. So in the guide, you will have this chart that gives you the depth that your rain garden should be based on the slope percentage that you've already calculated. So if you have a 4% slope or less, so that's very gentle, 10 to 13 centimeters or 4 to 5 inches in depth should be your final depth of your rain garden. So remember, we're trying to build a bowl shape, a nice gentle depression. If the slope is between 5 and 7%, then it's a little bit deeper, 15 to 18% centimeters, 6 to 7 inches. And if the slope is between 8 and 12, then it's about 20 centimeters in depth. So now we have a large slope, and we are looking to create a deeper bowl to capture all of that water that is kind of rushing in. So when the water is coming down the slope, and if you have a higher slope, so it's coming down with some force, you are looking to retain that water with a berm, so a sort of an earth wall. So the earth wall is going to help you create that bowl shape and help you retain the water that's coming down with some velocity. For example, we left our string in place, we started digging. And as we are removing pieces of sod and dirt, we are building a berm around our garden, and the height of the string is the exact same as the height of the berm. So that's why leaving the string in place is going to help you down the line. Now, plants and design, which is more the fun part of it. Choose your plants. So when you choose plants that are native to New Brunswick, you help support biodiversity by giving food to pollinators and other insects and bees and maybe even birds that might come and eat the fruits that come from your plants. So as I mentioned, the guide provides you with a list of 30 plants that are recommended for rain gardens, and like I said, the majority of which are native to our region. So any rain garden should include a mixture of sedges, rushes, and grasses. These 3 types of plants, they form the core or the basis of your rain garden. They will keep your garden stable. They will help balance also the garden. So you should always have sedges, rushes, and grasses in the center or consisting of the majority of your garden, and then you fill the rest with your flowering species. To add color, of course, add color and beauty to your garden and support your pollinators. You can also choose milkweed species, butterfly milkweed, purple milkweed, swamp milkweed, that will help support the monarch butterfly. So that's even another bonus of your rain garden, because you can actually transform your rain garden into a butterfly garden. So those 3 species of milkweeds you will find in the list of plants in the guide. So this is what the guide, the list of plants looks like in the guide. And they are bilingual. So the guide is structured in a way that is going to help you place your plants according to their tolerances. So it's going to give you their tolerances to either sunlight, so you have full sun, partial shade, or full shade, and each plant you will have those recommendations. We have another symbol for drought-tolerant plants. So drought-tolerant plants will require less maintenance over time and will be less sensitive to summers that are very warm. They will require less watering and less maintenance. Those that have a water drop next to them are flood resistant. Now, flood resistant, these ones are recommended to put in the deepest part of your garden. So those that will be inundated for the longest period of time. So we do have a few layout examples later, and it does show how you can use your little icons there to choose where your plants are going to go. And there is also a symbol for pollinators, which means that those are flowering species. And the list is available also in French. So this is the layout example that is in the guide. So what we did is that we used a list of about 14 different species, and we organized them by following those letters and following the symbols on the guide. You will make the link between those that are more flood tolerant are in the center. The height also is a factor, so you have the tallest that are more at the back or in the center, and have shorter ones, kind of a gradient of height. So we really we provided a layout example on how to use the plant list to organize and plan out the design of your garden. That is an example of a sketch that I did for our homeowner, so the same photos that you saw. I did a rough sketch to scale based on the size that we had determined already, and placed some different ideas of what kind of plants could go in different places, also considering the colors, because that's also important, and not having too many yellows together, and having some purples and whites and blues in different parts of the garden. And it really worked out very well. A good idea, a good way to calculate how many plants you're going to need is using the spacing recommendation, which is about 1 to 2 square feet for each plant, up to 3 feet if you are planting shrubs, however. But if you have some empty pots, or you can use anything at all, and you start placing them in your garden and then spacing them accordingly, you can help calculate how many plants you should buy, and help you determine your budget when you're shopping around at your local nursery. This was another sketch example of the planning phases before the construction. So this homeowner actually wanted to connect the 2 downspouts, and you will see that in the next pictures, where we dug 2 trenches and installed some underground PVC pipe that just connects the downspout right to the garden. So you have actually a real direct link between the rooftop runoff and the rain garden.
If you were in a wet area and you had a sump pump, would you do that as well?
Absolutely, yes. So in case the microphone didn't catch that, that question was regarding a sump pump. So you can absolutely direct the water that is coming out from a sump pump to a rain garden. Very good question. Yes, absolutely. So construction, just a little bit more details here. So when you're ready to start, you can use some marking paint or some chalk to make the outline of your garden, just to make sure that you measure once and measure twice and cut once, right? And then you remove the surface grass and start digging your bowl shape with some light slopes. Now, the diagram here has a little bit steeper slopes, but it does give you the idea that you're trying to create a bowl shape. So you can basically, it's not digging a hole, you're scraping and shaping your garden. So if you do have a slope, you're going to have to dig less on that side and more on this side. So you might be digging from one side and just shifting the dirt towards another side of your garden, depending on the landscape, so that you create a bed that is actually level. That is a very important point, is to create a level bowl. So if you do have a slope, you don't want a bowl that is crooked. So you do want to shift your soil so that you have a slope, but your bowl actually is level, so that if you were to artificially fill it up with water and there was no infiltration at all, the water would actually be level. So you have to imagine that either in your mind, or you can use a wooden plank and set it down after you've done some digging for a while, and put a level on it and just see where you're at with your leveling process. So you can dig until you've reached the height that you've calculated. So that's another advantage of maintaining your string where it is that you can actually use a ruler, a meter stick, or a measuring tape, and use the string to measure your depth, your at the deepest parts, because it can be difficult to gauge when you're actually doing it how far you've actually dug. So once you've achieved your total depth that you've calculated, you can dig another 5 to 10 centimeters more to accommodate for the added compost and mulch that you will be adding at the end. Because the depth that you have calculated, that's what you want as your final project, as your final depth. So that's an example. We used a chalk paint that was less toxic, more environmentally friendly. This homeowner wanted an odd-shaped, asymmetrical garden. I found that it looked more like an avocado. It actually turned out really, really beautiful. So that was an outline based on our measurements. We actually used a string of twine first to outline the shape, and then we used the marking paint. And then we started to go around cutting with mainly a cutting spade to make nice straight lines, and then we went in with, shovels to start working our way towards the center. So every time we would cut up some pieces of lawn, we would start building the berm. One thing that I learned in this process is that the berm is actually going to grow quite long, and it did surprise me how we gained more ground. So the garden grew in its final phase a little longer than we had planned, but it did work out because we arrived right at the edge of the top of the trench that we see here. And one very interesting point is that there is a storm drain right here, right there. So all of the water that's being captured from this rain garden from that rooftop has prevented all of that water from going into that storm drain, which is the exact purpose of this project. And it was just really, really wonderful that a storm drain was located right there. So adding your mulch and compost, or mulch or composted mulch. So it depends what you purchase. You can have a combination of both. So add your compost layer to your taste to increase the survival rates of your plants and protect your investments. And then the mulch layer will help beautify your garden, but also maintain moisture in your garden during times of drought. And it does add some organic matter that decomposes over time. So you do need to add some more mulch. Let's see. Oh. I may have lost power. Oh, no, I did not. Okay, so now this is our garden after we've added our composted mulch. We get a compost mulch that is combined. So this is actually a picture of a different rain garden, but it's just to display that when we were ready to start planting our garden, we set the plants down while they're still in their pots according to your design plan. So you actually space them appropriately and see if your sketch actually makes sense, and see if you have some empty spaces that you would like to fill up, so add some more spacing if you need to. So it's like I mentioned before, either 1 per square foot or 2 per square foot. So when you're planting your plants, each hole should be about twice the size of your pot. So as you're digging the hole for your plant, you can actually use the potted plant to measure to see if your hole is big enough. So it should be big enough to fit the entire pot inside, and deep enough so that the surface of the soil is equal to the surface of the soil inside the pot. So then you're ready to pull your plant out of its pot and plant your plant.
So it always has to be plants and not seeds.
It should be plants, but you could experiment with some seeds. I don't see why not. You could. It might just take some more time for them to grow and be a part of your garden. I have never experienced with just adding seeds first. I've always gone with mature plants, either 1-gallon potted plants or 2-gallon potted plants.
So you never use, what do you call those, bulrushes, you know, the top
I
ones?
have used bulrushes, but in a different type of project. So using cattails in a rain garden might not be recommended because they might dominate your garden. They have a tendency to take over. So for rain garden specifically, we left cattails and bulrush family off the list for that reason.
Okay,
Yeah.
but if you have a pond to
Yeah.
capture water.
Absolutely. So you have a different type of system here. So you wouldn't have a rain garden, you more have like a wet pond that is full of cattails, and cattails are the super filter of nature. So what you have there is amazing, as is. So it is actually a different type of stormwater management system, but it is stormwater management.
So it prevents whatever storm water comes from higher
Definitely.
up to go down into the.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you have one special type of stormwater management, which is a wet pond that is vegetated with cattails, who probably love that area, love that habitat. I saw it. They seem to be thriving, and they're filtering that water just as they are supposed to do in
Okay.
nature. So that's amazing. Yeah. So after you've planted your garden, it's important to water them immediately, just to make sure, because the transplanting process is a form of stress for the plant, so you do need to water it right away. And then keep watering it in the beginning for a while, just to maintain your plants. And as they mature and as they naturalize, they will become less dependent on watering, and they will be just fine with receiving the water from natural rainfall and runoff.
I'm sorry, Jen,
Yes.
I don't want to disturb you, but in our case, we're on a slope, the garden, so whatever rainwater is coming from higher up and going down towards the Chediac Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So do our garden boxes kind of act like rain gardens in a sense?
Oh, I'm sure they do. They would be capturing water that's falling from above and not water that's running off the surface, but
Well, here it runs off the surface.
oh, okay.
Yeah, because if we have a heavy rainfall, it kind of goes down, slopes